Hi, folks. I'm Monica Cordova, she, her, hers. I am the Deputy Director at FCYO, and we're happy to have you all here with us. We're just going to ask folks to introduce themselves in the chat. So the chat box is the little conversation bubble at the bottom, and you can click it. And please let us know who you are, where you're located, what your pronouns are, what your organization is in the chat box. And I'll put in there what we're looking for. We're going to wait a few minutes to allow folks to, more folks to hop on. But as we're doing that, if folks will put name, pronouns, location, org, just so we can get a sense of who's in the space with us. And then also from the FCYO team, we have JMO. Do you want to say hi, JMO, to everybody?
Hi, everyone. I am Jennifer Maldonado. I go by JMO, she, her pronouns, and I am the program associate with FCYO.
And then we'll introduce the wonderful Jennifer Farmer in a second, more fully. So JMO, do you want, while folks are still introducing themselves in the poll or in the chat box, we have a few fun polls just to kick us off. So JMO, do you want to launch our first poll? In light of Valentine's Day tomorrow, we thought a poll around what would your conversation heart say would be fun. So there's a few examples, so go ahead and select. And then we also like to see kind of where we are regionally. So kind of where you are located regionally, please select. Nobody wants to be mine, huh? My daughter is sick homesick. All right. So JMO, can you publish last call for folks to fill out our poll for the webinar? And JMO, if you can, go ahead and publish the results. So it looks like we're at 56% smash heteropatriarchy, 6% I love me too, 33% at to the left, and 6% at call me. And as kind of typical for much of what we do, we have a lot of friends in the West and East Coast, with the splattering around the South, Southwest, and Midwest. So thank you all. Please go ahead and continue if you haven't to introduce yourself in the chat box. And I'm now going to introduce Jennifer Farmer, who is going to lead this webinar session for us. We've worked with Jennifer for many years now and have really appreciated her consultation within the FCYO family and many of our organizations, and have had led a webinar for us last year, which really was fruitful. A lot of folks were able to produce op-eds from her op-ed training last year at this time. And so Jennifer works for Spotlight PR, a PR and consulting, public relations consulting firm. And she's really has a lot of expertise, and we're honored to have her with us today. So Jennifer, I'll hand it over to you. Jennifer, you're muted.
Yeah, I was muted on your end, so that's why I couldn't talk. So thanks everyone. Thanks Jennifer and Monica, and thanks everyone for giving up part of your Thursday night, especially the Thursday before Thanksgiving or before Valentine's Day. So I'll share my screen, and as I talk about, different strategies to gain media attention, if you have a question, feel free to put it in the chat feature, and Jennifer and Monica and myself will do our best to monitor it. So I want to start and by the way, my pronouns are she, her, hers. And I want to start with telling you a little bit about Spotlight PR. So Spotlight PR is a social justice public relations practice. And I work with people who are committed to social good. So they must be advancing racial justice, social justice, climate justice, immigrant justice. They must be doing something to advance the world and to address equities that marginalized communities face. And part of what I do is trainings like this. This is actually my favorite part of my job, is being in community with you all and the give and take of information. But then I also do media relations, media pitching, writing, and also positioning. And I know that I will be having a follow-up conversation with those of you who have filled out the doodle form to support you in your work. So tonight we will talk about, I want to give you a context for what's happening in media. I want to talk to you about the competition that you face when trying to attract media attention. I want to share tactics for how you can generate media coverage. And then I want to give you some cost-effective paid media options. And so that's what we'll go over. A couple other things about myself. If you want to connect with me after this call, you can follow me on Twitter or Instagram at PR_whisperer. And then you could also visit my website, spotlightpr.org. So in terms of where we are, between 2001 and 2016, 230,000 jobs were lost in journalism, according to data from the Washington Post. The more recent contraction in media companies and the pace of cuts is really mind-boggling. So, during that 15-year period, over 200,000 jobs were lost. And what that means is that there are fewer editors, there are fewer producers, there are fewer writers, there are fewer reporters. And so sometimes it's not that we don't have a story, it's not that our stories are not timely or not interested, but we are literally pitching and reaching out to a smaller pool of people. According to Business Insider, 7,700 people working in journalism lost their jobs in 2019 alone. This is higher than the 5,000 jobs in media that were lost between 2014 and 2017. So we're really seeing a number of people who are leaving the industry, a number of media companies that are being cut or that are cutting staff. It's important to note that many of the media companies that are closing their doors are progressive or left-leaning. And the reason that I share that is because when we talk about what we're doing and we try to capture attention for what we're doing, there are some people who will never give us the time of day. There are other people who are more inclined to respond favorably when we reach out. And some of those companies are the very companies that are losing money, that are going out of business. The other thing that I want to note is that to begin with, there are fewer people of color in the media. That's just like a starting place. But when you factor in all of these cuts in media, it has a disproportionate impact on the people of color who are in media. And I raise that because for people of color who are in media, they tend to have a better understanding and a better appreciation of the issues that our communities face, about how to talk about our issues, about the sensitivities. And so when you have fewer people of color in media, part of what that means is that you aren't pitching reporters of color as much. You aren't pitching hosts and editors and producers. And so I share that to let you know kind of where we are and what we're up against. In terms of some of the media outlets that have closed their doors, and this is like recently, closed their doors or either laid off staff. A publication called Gawker, HuffPost. And HuffPost, they announced a series of layoffs at the beginning of 2019 and then towards the last quarter of 2019. Mike.com was a very progressive outlet, and they did a lot on policing. They did a lot on education equity. They shut down in 2019. Rewire News, they announced several cuts. They've recently had a change in leadership where they have a new executive director, but they're, like the other people on this list, they are working with a reduced staff. Splinter was a political news site, and they closed in 2019. Think Progress, many of us may be aware of Think Progress. They were a sister organization for the Center for American Progress. They closed in 2019. Some of the bigger media outlets that are still opening or still operating, they are operating with shorter staff. So USA Today, Vice Media, Gannett, which owns USA Today, Canadian Broadcasting Company, BuzzFeed, all these outlets have announced cuts. And so they're operating with fewer people. Verizon Media has also announced that there will be cuts in 2020. They made some cuts in 2019. So I share this to just give you a very sobering and a very realistic perspective of what we're up against and the landscape that the terrain that we're playing on. Now, as you think about the cuts, that's one piece of context. The other piece of context is this is a hotly contested presidential election year. And during presidential election years, journalists who cover politics, they know what they're doing. There are other journalists who are assigned to different beats, and they may be reassigned to politics just because the need is so great. And so we have many journalists who maybe a year ago or 6 months ago, maybe they were covering health, maybe they were covering education, and they will be reassigned. This will happen more and more the closer we get to November 2020. So as you think about the contraction in media, as you think about the primary focus on people's attention, and when I say people, I mean the media, it's also important that you understand the other things that you will have to overcome, and it is possible to overcome them, and I will walk through how. So one, the people who pitch the media, the people who try to get reporters to cover our stories, the public relations staff, they outnumber journalists 4-to-1. At least that was the statistic 2 years ago. Given the contraction in media, it's probably closer to 6-to-1 or 7-to-1. But basically, there are more of us who are trying to get attention from a smaller number of people than ever before. As I said before, journalists who are traditionally assigned to beats other than politics will be reassigned to cover the presidential campaign and also the presidential election. This means that there will be fewer reporters to cover non-political matters, at least for a short time. The other thing to note is that media outlets are competing for ratings. They will broadcast and feature content that supports their ratings. The most viewed items, such as debates or, the Oscars were this weekend, any event that is highly watched by viewers is going to be a focus for the media. And so as you think about how to plan your events and how to get media coverage, you want to find a way to tie your event to what's happening in the broader media landscape. A perfect example of this is there's an influencer and social justice advocate by the name of April Rain. And several years ago, maybe it was 2012 or possibly 2013, April, she grew tired of seeing the lack of diversity in the people who were winning the Oscars. And so she started a campaign called Oscars So White. When she started the campaign, she did it on the night of the Oscars. And because everyone was already tweeting about the Oscars, she received a ton of attention, and she was able to elevate the issue of the lack of diversity in people who were receiving those awards because she was very strategic in when she elevated that issue. The other thing to note is since the media is naturally interested in ratings boost and clicks, you want to have some level of online engagement during highly televised debates. So even if your issue is not directly related to a debate or to, coming up, we have Super Tuesday, and then we have different states that will have different primaries. Even if your issue is not directly related to that, if you have an online presence on that night and you can find a way to tie it into the political issues of the day, you stand a better chance of getting on the radar of other people or of journalists. However, you don't want to compete with these events by dropping major announcements on or during this time. You want to have a presence, and by presence, you want to be active on social media, but you don't want to announce a major report on Super Tuesday if your report has nothing to do with Super Tuesday, and if you can't link it in a way. So if possible, to the extent that you can, you want to tap into the dominant coverage and link your issue to the current news cycle. And so if we think about the past week, what's been in the news? Well, the prosecution of Roger Stone has been in the news, and we're probably not interested in that, so let's pass. Gayle King's interview with Lisa Leslie, that has been in the news, as well as the reaction of a number of people who saw that interview, and some people who felt that Gayle King was out of bounds for the questioning, and in particular, rapper Snoop Dogg, 50 Cent, and a few other folks, they really went after her in a very aggressive manner. If part of your work is highlighting how women of color or Black women fare in this environment, that would have been a perfect news hook for you to use that and then introduce your issue. If part of your issue is highlighting the importance of respectful discourse, you could have used that issue to segue into respectful discourse. So if you think about what's in the news, then you could think about, okay, well, is there a way, does my issue connect to what's in the news at all? And if it does connect, then I should talk about it. Another perfect example is February is Black History Month. And if you have a policy or a proposal that maybe it's not pertaining to Black history, but it's pertaining to Black futures and how to ensure brighter futures, then you could use Black History Month as a hook to talk about that. So to the extent possible, you want to tap into the dominant coverage and link your issue to the current news cycle. So I'm wondering if we could just take a minute, and I would love if you could just write in the chat feature what the most creative thing you've done or seen to generate media coverage. And and I know you don't have a ton of space in the chat feature, but I'm just curious, just write down the most creative thing that you've done or seen to generate media coverage. And then, once you've done that, Jennifer or Monica, maybe one of you could read out some of what you see. And by the way, thank you. Someone followed me on Instagram since I've been talking. Thank you.
So for folks that are new to Zoom, there's a little conversation box at the bottom right-hand side that says chat. And if you want to chat any kind of creative things you've seen or used to generate media coverage, feel free to jump in. But I think Jane Fonda's protest and arrest are something I've never seen before, definitely creative to raise awareness and generate media coverage on climate justice.
Anything else, Monica?
No, one more. Oh wait, now they're moving. Now we're getting, I'm sorry, people were typing. Seen SoCal group had a young person running for local office. They had a press conference with her a voter guide from her, etc., to highlight how she was too young to vote, but still had strong stance on community issues.
I can read the next one. We had a campaign for high school graduation speakers to incorporate climate change into their speeches. It wasn't getting much traction until schools started telling students that they couldn't say climate change in their speech. So we reframed some of our messaging around their struggles, and censorship picked up a lot then.
Wow. Great. So one of the reasons that I wanted to do this exercise is because when you think about ways to get media attention, and you have to think about how to be creative. And sometimes, let's face it, we're dealing with so much, we're so busy, we have so much on our plate that we can get drained. One of the best ways to generate ideas is to talk to people who are doing similar work, or people who are part of the country, and ask them what strategies, what tips they're using. And sometimes when you ask someone what they're doing, even if you don't intend to do exactly what they're doing, just the conversation will provoke an idea and it will inspire you. But if you work in a very solitary way and you aren't in conversation with other people, it is hard to get fresh ideas. And sometimes we just need, fresh ideas. So let me just share some ideas for ways that you can improve and get media in an election year. The first thing that I want to share with you is the importance of expanding your concept of media. A lot of times when we think about media, we think of print reporters, TV reporters, we think of radio hosts, right? But in the day and age that we live in now, with the expansion of social media, with the various social media platforms, with the evolution of podcasts, as well as with the sophistication of various organizations and communicating with their members and others, your concept of media has to be as broad as possible. So your media list and your media outreach, it shouldn't just include people who you typically think of and people who are a part of the media, but it should also include influencers. Influencers are people who have large audiences who follow them, and they follow them because they're interested in that person's unique perspective. And so your media list should have influencers. And if you're not sure what an influencer is in your industry, in the area that you work in, you could do a Google search. Like, let's say you're doing climate justice work. You could do a Google search that says influencers and climate justice. You can do a search on Twitter, and you could use the hashtag. You could use the hashtag of the issue. So if your issue is climate justice or climate change, you can do a search using those hashtags, and then you could pay attention to whose name comes up and how many followers they have. And that'll give you a sense of who the influencers are. When I talk about expanding your concept of media, many organizations have newsletters, and their newsletters have an incredible reach. So the Pew Charitable Trust, they have a publication called State Line. The Southern Poverty Law Center, they have a publication, and their publication actually has an editor. ACLU has a publication, and ACLU, if they invite you to write a long form essay, there was a time when they would actually pay you to do that. I don't know if they still do, but there was a time. But the bottom line is they have a publication. And the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, they have a publication. It's called Crisis Magazine. So a lot of the groups who we are in struggle with, and the groups who are aligned around our issues, they not only have large memberships, but they have publications. And when you think about who you're sharing your press release with, or who you're reaching out to and trying to get coverage of an issue, you want to think about these organizations too. So your concept of media, it has to be bigger than just the people that society tells us represents the media. You also want to include commentators. And commentators are regular guests on cable news shows, or they're regular guests on radio programs. And the reason you want to include commentators is because these people have ample opportunity to talk. They have more opportunity to talk and more opportunity to get in front of a camera or on a radio than you and I do. And if they're going to be talking, if they're going to be in front of a microphone or in front of a camera, we want them to be aligned and to understand our issue. And so if you say, okay, well, Jennifer, how do I find out who the commentators are for a particular publication or for a particular cable news network? You watch that channel and you find out, when you watch the channel, you will see who's introduced as a commentator. And if you watch a person talk, underneath their name, there will be a bar that identifies who they are. It could say political commentator or contributor. And then you look that person up on social media. The great thing about social media is that a lot of people include their contact information in their bio on like Twitter or Facebook. And so that's how you can find out. But you want to make sure that your media list is not just the broad reporters, the broad editors, but it also includes people like commentators, podcast hosts, and also these publications that I mentioned. So you want to be as broad as possible in how you define who's a part of the media. The reason this is important is because the best communication strategies are strategies that are layered. And so what I mean by that is you take one message and you share that message with as many channels as possible, and you share it with as many people as possible. When you do that, you make sure that you ensure that your issue is blanketed, and you give people ample opportunities to see and to hear and to interact with your content. So I would love for us to think about who some of the influencers are. And so if you can use your phone or you can use your computer, and I would love you to, maybe there's an influencer who comes to mind. If that's the case, great. If you have someone who comes to mind and they're an influencer for your particular area of work, if you just put their name in the chat feature. If you don't have an influencer in mind, why don't we just test out what I just said in terms of searching to find out who an influencer is, and take 5 minutes and Google on your phone or go to Twitter. And I don't know if you guys might not use Twitter, but whatever social media platform that you use. So let's just take a few minutes to do that. And Jennifer and Monica, if you could help me out and maybe call out a few of the influencers that you see listed in the chat feature.
Awesome. So I see Colin Kaepernick. I hope I don't pronounce this next one wrong, but Yada Shahid.
Yes.
Vanessa McCate. I put Rosario Dawson. I follow her, and she's definitely in that. I think her and Joaquin Phoenix just dropped a small video around climate change. Nicole Hannah-Jones.
Okay.
Can I ask folks, can I make another quick, when you put the person, will you put how you see them, if they're connected to a particular issue, just in case other folks are looking for other influencers that might kind of connect to their work and may not know who those folks are.
Yeah.
And let me share one thing about some of the names that we're listing. So we listed Colin Kaepernick, Yara Shahidi, Rosario Dawson, Nicole Hannah-Jones. I'll put Nicole Hannah-Jones to a side and I'll come back to her. Vanessa Nakati, I actually don't know who Vanessa is, Dan Jones, and Cardi B. So a lot of the people who we're listing, these are celebrities. And while they are influencers and while we pay attention to them, they may not be as accessible as another tier of influencers. So some celebrities are really responsive to their fans, but the purpose of this conversation is I want to give you guys realistic tools and strategies, and I want to give you things that are going to work. And so when I say influencers, these people are influencers, but some of them are celebrities, and it's probably harder to reach them. Now, Nicole Hannah-Jones, she's an exception. Nicole Hannah-Jones, for those of you who don't know, she's a journalist with the New York Times Magazine. She recently did the huge research project, the 1619 research project on, you know, America's legacy, America's history of slavery. And she's very accessible. She's very active on social media, and she's very responsive. And so you probably could reach out to her and she would probably respond. But some of the other people, I'm not sure. I see Linda Sarsour, same with her. She is accessible. I see Patrice Cullors. She's probably accessible as well, meaning that you could reach out to her on social media and you would get a response. There's another layer of influencers that are probably just below these folks, and they may have 10 to 20,000 followers, perhaps they have 30,000 followers, but they are very, very engaged. And those are the people who I want you to think about, you know, how you connect with. Now, if you say, okay, well, Jennifer, how do we make a connection with some of the higher profile people? There are organizations, and their strategy is to connect many of these celebrities who are interested in social justice with social justice organizations. So there's an organization in New York. It was started by the actor Matt McGrory, and he's got several advisors, and they exist to connect celebrities with social justice causes. I will find the name before we get off the phone and share that with you. So as we think about, and thank you for explaining who Vanessa is and for sharing that. As we think about how to find influencers, I really would like us to think about, or I would like us to have a conversation around where we get our news. And so, Jennifer, if you could go through the first poll, so just so we can find out where we're even searching for influencers and where we're accessing information. So Jennifer, can you queue up the first poll, or the first two questions?
All right, just launched it. If folks could please answer the two questions that is now on your screen, and we'll wait for everyone to answer so we can launch the results. All right, I'm going to close it in a little bit, just waiting on 3 more folks.
Okay.
All right, y'all, going to close it and show everyone the poll.
Okay, so this is really insightful. So most of the people on this call said that you get your information from social media, and then a close second is publications. To a lesser extent, it's family and friends. And then in terms of the social media platforms that you're going, now I'm surprised that it's Twitter, because I thought it would have been Instagram or Snapchat, but it is Twitter. And a close second or distant second is Instagram, and then Facebook. And then Snapchat to a lesser degree. So if you are on Twitter and you're trying to find an influencer, a couple things that you could do. One, there's a firm called M&R, or there's a handle called M&R Campaigns. And M&R Campaigns, they compile lists of journalists and influencers who cover different issues. And so if you go to their handle, and I think it's just @M+R campaigns, if you go to their handle and you click on their list, you can see, you can pick the list that you want, and they've got several. And then you can go in that list and it'll show you everyone who's talking about that issue. And based on that, you can find out who the journalists are, who the influencers are. So that's one way to find it. Another way to find out who the influencers are for a given issue is to use the hashtag. I think I mentioned that earlier. Use the hashtag of the issue and then pay attention to who is talking about it. And that's for Twitter. You can do something similar on Instagram. And if you're on Instagram, you want to be looking at the Instagram platform, but also the newly launched IGTV platform, which allows people to post longer videos. I think the limit on Instagram is up to 1 minute or possibly 2 minutes. And on IGTV, you can post videos of any length. And so you want to pay attention to both platforms as you think about who's influencing the conversation. So, so let's talk a little bit about, I'm going to share my screen again. Let's talk a little bit about paid media. So as we think about how to generate media attention and how to share with our audience and our networks what we're doing, I want to mention paid media. If you are dealing with a publication that is Black owned or owned by you know, the Latinx community, or maybe to a lesser extent, if it's minority owned, a lot of those publications are so starved for cash that if you make even a small advertising investment, they will couple that advertising investment with earned media. And so what I mean by that is if you purchase a very, very small ad, and by the way, their rates are going to be a lot cheaper than mainstream media outlets, but if you purchase a very, very small ad, some of them will then do a story on your issue. Or they will, maybe your ad space was going to run in one issue, and sometimes they will extend it. And so when it comes to minority publications, a small investment can lead to earned media and other media coverage. The other thing to keep in mind is, so one minority publication is, and it's kind of like an umbrella group, but it's the National Newspapers Publishers Association. And it's a network that all minority publications, all Black publications belong to. And if you were to send an op-ed to NNPA, they would share it with all of their publications. And so one story could be shared multiple places. It's also true if they were to do a story on you or your issue. So they should definitely be in your media list. If NNPA does a story on you, when that story is written, it's not just for one publication, it is for multiple publications. And so to the public, it looks like your issue is appearing everywhere, but it's really just one story, one conversation, one op-ed. And so as we think about how to generate media coverage, our approach should include paid media. And paid media is basically media that you pay for. It could include advertisements on Twitter, advertisements on Facebook, Instagram, billboard ads, and I'll give you a cost-effective billboard ad in a slide coming up here. So, so I said a cost-effective billboard ad. Now, for a lot of people, when we were coming up, if you wanted to do a billboard ad, your billboard had to stay up for 30 to 45 days. And that meant that you were paying for each of those days. It could be very, very costly. Well, there's an alternative called Blip. And Blip allows you to do digital billboards, and you only pay for how long your content is up. So you basically pay per blip. And pay per blip means that you're only going to be charged when your ad is displayed. And so if you see a digital billboard, there are several ads on that billboard all throughout the day. Maybe in a one-day period, your ad is only shown 5 times. You're only going to pay for each of those 5 times. The other great thing about Blip is you put in your budget, and then they will help craft a campaign that works for your budget. And so you could say, you know, I want to spend $1 a day, or I want to spend $10 a day, and I want to do it over 10 days. And there are Blip billboards, you can look at their map and you'll get a sense of where their billboards are in terms of where they are geographically located across the country. And they're pretty extensive. So this is not like it's limited. The other thing is, if you were to do a traditional billboard, the cost of those are influenced by where you are in the country, by, the reach that you want to have, the size of the billboard. And just an example, a billboard in Los Angeles or New York is going to be a lot more expensive than in North Carolina. A billboard that is placed, and when I say a billboard, I mean the traditional billboards. A billboard that's placed during election year is going to be a lot more expensive than a billboard that's placed in a non-election year. And so for those reasons, digital billboards, and in particular, I'm suggesting Blip as something that we try, is cost effective. It allows you to be really tailored, to really tailor your message and tailor, your audience. So let's say you're trying to do a campaign and the people that you want to talk to are school administrators. Well, you could run that ad on Blip as they are heading into school early in the morning and at no other time during the day, or perhaps when they're being let out at the end of the school day. The big thing to remember about Blip is you are not locked into a lengthy contract, and you can determine what your daily budget is, what you want to spend. So social media advertising is also a great example of paid media that we should be considering. With social media advertising, you control the budget, you control the length of time the ad runs for, you control the message, and you really don't need an extensive budget. And so let's say you are planning an event and you really want to get media coverage to that event. You can advertise the week of the event on Twitter or on Facebook, and you can put in your targeted demographic, and again, very, very cost effective. And if you feel like, okay, well, our organization can't afford it, perhaps you can pool your resources with another organization, or you could run a GoFundMe campaign to raise money to do what you need to do. So the other thing that's really important, and this is like an example of earned media, is that you sharpen your lead. And when you write a press release or a document and you want to get the attention of the reporters, you want to sharpen the introduction of that communication. And so in journalism, the lead is the very first paragraph of a story. And I always tell people, sometimes we are so passionate about what we do that we want to put all the facts in, we want to put all the details in, and our documents end up being really, really lengthy. But we cannot assume that reporters, producers, and other members of the media will read our entire document. And so it's very, very important that the lead is as sharp and crisp as possible, and that you are leading with the most important information first. And so when possible, you want to put the who, the what, the when, the where, and the why in that first paragraph. And you want to give people a reason to want to keep reading the rest of the document. But that lead should be the sharpest ever. The other thing about the lead is it should have your main point, how you feel about an issue, and then go into the who, what, when, where, and why. Your subject line also has to be very, very sharp. So we live in a time now where a lot of people consume their content not in front of a computer screen, but on a phone. And so they're moving about, or they're just reading on their phone a ton. And when you look at an email on your phone, it's very different than looking at your computer. There's less that you can see. And so your subject line needs to be really, really sharp, and it needs to be catchy. Sometimes, we want to put all the details in a subject line and we want to make our whole point, but your subject line, it shouldn't be clickbait, but when people see it, they should say, okay, I have to open this. I want to see what she means or what he means. And I've heard of people putting in their subject line, you don't want to read this, or whatever you do, don't open this. I don't know if I'm ready to go that far, but I do think that your subject lines need to be catchy, they need to be impactful, they need to state what's happening. And again, you lead with the most important information in that first paragraph after the subject line. The other thing to remember in an election year, and so I talked about how busy journalists are, and I talked about the contraction in media. And so it is very, very important that you start as early as possible. You want to give yourself more notice than usual. In the past, in my work, it has taken me at least 3 to 4 weeks to land an exclusive. An exclusive is when you negotiate with the publication. They will be the first to write about an issue. You give them the story for a period of time. Sometimes it's 24 hours, sometimes it's half a day, and they will be the only publication that writes about it. And it takes time to get an exclusive agreement. The reason it takes time is because you don't just have to sell the reporter and get them interested, but they have to sell their editor. And let's say a reporter is interested, but their editor is not. Then you have to start that whole process over again and move on to another line. And so you have to give people as much notice as possible. The other thing about an election year is that journalists are moving around a ton. They're just really, really busy. And so if you reach out to them the week of the event, or sometimes, a week and a half before the event, if they're traveling, they may not see it. They might not have time to act on it. And so you want to start early. This also includes your events. If you are doing something and and let's say your event or your report is tied to the election in some way, you want to release that with as much notice as possible. And so let's say you're having a big election protection initiative involving young people on election day, and the young people will be at the polls ensuring that people are able to vote, right? Let's say that's your event. You don't want to communicate that the week before the election. You want to communicate that 3 weeks before the election, because you want to find the right reporters. You want to give them time to act on it. So again, given the contraction in the media and the many individuals who are running for president, reporters covering politics and the election, they're busy. And so we just can't wait to the last minute to pitch them. Now you may say, okay, well, it's going to take me a minute to get all the facts, or I just don't have all the information. And what I would say to you in response is, do not wait for perfection. You can reach out and say, hey, listen, I want to put something on your radar, and I will have more details in a week or in 2 weeks, but I want you to know that this is happening, and I want to find out if you're interested. And sometimes just teasing an idea will give you a sense of who's interested, who you might need to push on a little bit harder, and when you just need to turn to someone else. So I also think that, as you're trying to get media in an election year, that it's very important that you diversify your targets. When I say targets, I mean your media targets. I know when I say targets, that word can seem very vague, but you want to diversify, who you are reaching out to and who you're trying to get to cover your work. And so 2 ways that you can diversify your outreach is to engage blogs and to focus on local publications. So where it comes to blogs, if a story appears on multiple blogs, a media outlet will feel like, okay, well, this story is really interesting, maybe we should cover it. And so when you think about the influencers who are covering the work that you're doing, some of them may have blogs, or they may share links to blogs. But I think you want to spend some time investigating which blogs are writing about your issue, and then you want to engage them. And the idea is not just to get your work on one blog, but to get your work on a bunch of smaller blogs. And you could take the same article and pitch it to multiple blogs. This is because a lot of publications have something called exclusivity agreements. And what that means is that if they do a story on your issue, they don't want that story to appear anywhere else. blogs don't always have those restrictions. And so if you can take one story and get it on 4 blogs, then you could take that coverage and you can share it with a larger media outlet and get even more coverage that way. The thing about sharing it with multiple blogs is you want as many people to see your work as possible, and you want to build momentum for larger outlets to say, okay, this story is appearing somewhere, so many places, why aren't we covering it, or why haven't we covered it? You also want to focus on local publications. And, you know, from where I sit, I physically sit in Washington, D.C., and a lot of my work is with national organizations, and hence that means national outlets. And the bar for getting something in a national outlet is higher than a local publication. And so you want to be engaging local publications, and don't feel like, you know, well, it has to be the New York Times, or it has to be the Washington Post, or it has to be USA Today. What you should be interested in is getting a link, you know, getting your story covered somewhere. And once it's covered somewhere and you have that link that you could share, then you share it with the bigger media outlets and try to get them covered, you know, that way. And so in terms of ways to build relationships with local reporters, you can invite the reporter to coffee. You can invite them to a Zoom meeting. If you are planning a Zoom meetup with young people, you can ask reporters if they want to be a part of it. And what I think about is offering reporters something that they don't ordinarily get, and something that is hard to come by. And so by virtue of who you are and the work that you do, you already have something that reporters don't see every day. And so an invitation to coffee or to a Zoom meeting or to a hangout is good. And if you really want to take your game up, have that invitation come from a young person who's organizing with you versus an organizing staff or someone who was on staff. And the reason that I say that is because, again, how many times do reporters pick up the phone and hear a 16-year-old or a 17-year-old talking to them? And so that's unusual, it's unique. It's very easy to be dismissive to a staff person. It's a little bit harder to be dismissive to a young person. So, you know, you could train the young people who you work with to make some of those calls. Let's talk a little bit about press releases. So, you know, we talked about the contraction in media, and we've talked about just the various things that you're up against as you try to share your message. I want you to know that press releases should be used strategically. Every issue is not press release worthy, and a press release in 2020 does not hold the same weight as a press release in 2000 did. The media landscape has changed. Newsrooms have smaller staffs. Those staffs are stretched thin, and a press release that is not read, or a press release that is not picked up, meaning a quote is not pulled out of it, included in a story, it's close to useless, okay? And so I think we need to be as strategic as possible when we send our press release. And part of what I mean by that is that our press releases need to be short. And by short, all you want to do is give the reporter a quote that they can use in their story. And so all you really need is an opening paragraph that sets the context for what you're talking about, and then a quote from the person who you want included in the story. That's it. It doesn't need to be any longer. The only time when you might need a longer press release is if you're in litigation or if you're dealing with something that's really, really complicated. But for the most part, what we should be doing is boiling down our issue to a very discrete, a very small sound bite, and then sharing that. The purpose of the press release is to get that quote included and to get you a call. What you want people to do is to read that press release and say, you know what? I need to call Monica because I need to find out more about this issue, or I need to hear more. If you are thinking, well, you know, we have a lot to say, and I hear what you're saying, Jennifer, about the press release being short, but we have so much content that we want to include. I would really encourage you to consider an audio press release, or to consider putting your content, recording your content on Zoom, recording your content on a platform called Zencaster, which I'll talk about shortly. And basically, you basically state how you feel about an issue, and then you share the MP3 file of your feelings, once you record it. When you do that, you do a couple of unique things. First, you share information with people who may not have an influx of information in that format. Two, if you are very engaging, if you give stories, that's just intriguing. And I think the third thing, I know I said two, and I promise you I can't count, but the third thing is some of us can say what we mean faster than what we can write it. We can talk very quickly and we can get it out. And so if you could produce a small video recording very quickly, then you can also be the person to have your story included. When I say short video, I mean like 2 to 5 minutes. And even 5 minutes is a little bit on the long side. So ways that you can do the video or the recording. Basically, you want to record your reaction to an issue. And you want to share it with TV stations and radio stations and podcast hosts in particular. You can share it with print paper, but these are the publications that need that audio content. And so a radio station, if you put together a very, very nice recording and send it to them, it could be included in the show. Same way with the podcast. The other thing about this is you can increase the likelihood of getting your release included in a story, or let me back up for a second. So the audio is very, very helpful, in particular for radio, podcast hosts, and to a lesser extent, TV. If you say, you know what, I hear you, but maybe we don't have the technical capacity, or maybe that's something that we'll try later in the year, we still want to write something. I want to let you know that there are a ton of influencers and celebrities, and when they want to share a message, they share their message on Instagram. They share their message on Twitter. They share their message on Facebook. And you see this in like threads where they will announce before they start writing. If they're on Twitter, they'll write thread in all caps, or they'll write thread before they start talking. And then they'll post, maybe 5 different bullets. And these are very succinct points, but they make their point that way. Or they will, they'll post it on Instagram, basically how they feel about an issue. I've also seen people who will just go live on IGTV and upload a longer video. So all of these are things that you can consider as a way to get your point across without necessarily writing a press release. And the final thing that I'll say about this is if it takes you a day and a half to write a press release, but you're reacting to something in current events, that's too long. And sometimes our work is not covered because we are not fast enough. We don't get the story into the publication quickly enough. I heard an opinion editor at the Washington Post say that when it comes to opinion essays, they get so many that sometimes he will take the first one that's well written that he gets, that's well written, that makes a good point, that advances an argument. And so sometimes, we try really, really hard to be perfect and to have everything just right. And we have a long list of people who need to sign up on our press releases. All that is nice, but the quicker that we can do it, the better. And if quicker means not writing it out, but recording it on your phone or recording it on one of the platforms that I mentioned, that is a big score. And so I've also heard people say, well, should I use a press statement or should I use a press release? And these two are cousins. The press release and the press statements, they're cousins. Basically, a press release is going to have more contextual information. It's going to have a quote. It may have data. It may have, you know, other supporting information. It probably has framing paragraphs. It could have quotes from multiple people. And a lot of times it is longer than a press. Again, if it's a page and a half and people don't read it, you're really undercutting your own success. A press statement is a verbatim reaction from someone. And, you know, it's just what someone said. So it could be, this press statement is from Jennifer Farmer, and this is how she feels about climate change. And then it's just my reaction. A press statement is also reactionary, meaning they're issued after something happens. It's not necessarily a proactive tool, it's a reactive tool. And a press statement, it communicates an opinion or a belief that's not necessarily backed up by supplemental data or by third-party validation. You know, it's basically what someone thinks and what they said. A press release, it should have that contextual information to kind of bolster the points. And so when you think about, well, you know, should I do a press statement or a press release? Well, one way that you can answer that is, am I reacting to something or am I breaking the news? Am I breaking the story open or am I reacting to something that's already there? But either way, as you think about, you know, which one of these documents you will use, the point that I want you to walk away from this call with is that it needs to be short. So as we think about, you know, how to put some of what I've shared into practice, what are like some of the big dates that you could either find a way to attach your issue to if it's relevant or stay away from? Super Tuesday is the first one that comes to mind. So Super Tuesday is on March 3rd, and there are many, many states, they call it Super Tuesday because so many states have their primaries on that day. You're announcing a major report or an event, I wouldn't even do it on Super Tuesday. And by the way, if you're announcing something, I don't even think that early Monday mornings are the best time because people have been away from the weekend. You know, if they've been on vacation, maybe they're coming back and they're digging out. And so if you send something at 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock on a Monday morning, you run the risk of people not seeing it. That's an aside. State primaries, debates, campaign rallies, anniversaries. If it's an anniversary, you can find a way to attach your issue to that anniversary as long as it's, you know, relevant. And so as you think about, okay, well, what are the opportunities for capturing media? Think about the big dates, whether or not those dates align with what you're doing in a very realistic way. And if they do, you want to ride the wave. So, the Super Bowl. The Super Bowl this year involved a Kansas football team, and the name of the Kansas football team is very derogatory to indigenous people. And there was a brilliant opinion piece in the Washington Post about cultural appropriation, about the insensitivity of some of these football team names. And it was time to run on the Super Bowl. And I thought that was brilliant. We know the Super Bowl is happening every year. We also know that for the indigenous community, you know, we want to have more respect and we want to raise the level of awareness and consciousness. And we want to address that. So the timing of that opinion piece with the Super Bowl was great. That's an example of, you know, of what I mean. Just a couple more things, and then I'll be happy to take any questions that you have. So again, if you want to record and distribute your own content, which I think you should, you can use Zoom, you can use Zencaster, or other platforms like that. You can even use Spreaker, which is a podcast platform, but you can record in that. You want to keep your audio file short, and that will help ensure that, you know, people listen to it. What you want is for people to listen to it and say, okay, well, we have to keep coming back to this person because they're going to give us unique information. They're going to give us an honest perspective. I see some folks posting things in the chat, and we will come to you in a second. The other big takeaway that I want you to have from this conversation is that it's really important that as we think about how to get media in a landscape where there are fewer media outlets and fewer reporters, it's very, very important that we think about how to create our own content platforms. So one content platform is your organizational website. You control that website. You can put up the content that you want. You can take it down when you want. You can edit it. And to the extent that we can control our own content platforms, we can control our message. And I really think the campaigns and brands that want coverage will need to create their own content platforms and also turn to platforms such as Medium, Blavity, YouTube, that allows people to just put their information or their message on there. The reason this is important is because, one, you have direct control over your message and the probability of people seeing it. And you'll also make reporting as easy as possible for journalists, once they find your story, whether it's your website, a podcast that you all host, a video channel, Vimeo, TikTok, etc. If you control the content platform, from there, basically what you're doing is building an audience and building a loyal following. And if you start early and you start working on how to build your audience early on your own content platforms, you'll be so much farther ahead of the curve. As you create your own content platforms, I think the orientation has to be how you give your followers what they need. And part of that is understanding who your followers are, why they're following you to begin with, meaning, what is their connection to the issue. And once you know that, you can provide them what they need. And if your approach shifts from, okay, how do I tell my story, to how do I serve my people, whoever my people might be, you will automatically develop a different kind of dynamic with the people who follow you. One way that you can give your followers what they need is by giving them frequent and relevant communication. So if you have an email list and people have signed up for your email list, not everyone signs up for the same thing or for the same type of content. So the research that you do at the front end to find out who your audience is, what they want, how they want to be communicated with, that will help you serve them. Another thing to consider is there is a service called Help a Reporter Out, and it stands for, a lot of times it shows up just like this, HARO, but it stands for Help a Reporter Out. It's owned by the media research firm Cision, and basically it's a way for reporters and editors to put their stories that they're working on and put their questions out directly to sources. And I'm going to stop my screen and I'm just going to show you what this looks like. Let me show you what it looks like. I'm going to share my screen again here. Okay, so Help a Reporter Out, it's a way for reporters to say, okay, here's the story that I'm working on and here's the type of sources that I want to talk to. And they send these out 3 times a day. They send it at 6 a.m., they send it at 12 p.m., and they send it at 6 p.m. And they send it, it's broken up by topic and by issue. And you basically find your issue. And so if you were interested in biotech and healthcare, you hear the requests that have come in from journalists who are looking to talk to people in these areas. And you see if there's anything that you want to respond to. So U.S. doctors needed for an article on nebulizers. Like, none of this stuff I don't think would apply to us, right? But then there's a section on business and finance. There's another section on education. There's a section, and sometimes these sections are longer than others. There's a section on entertainment and media. And so reporters basically say what they want. You look at it, and if that is you, or if you want to respond to that issue, you basically, there's a way for you to respond in here. So first they summarize what you want, and then you go down and the reporter's contact information is right there. The biggest drawback to help a reporter out is that they come so frequently throughout the day that you need to have someone who's committed to just searching the email. And if you don't have someone who's committed to searching the email, then you're not going to be able to respond to the request. That's the biggest drawback. In terms of cost, you can get a membership for as little as $20 a month. You can get a membership for $50 a month, but it's not very, it's not very expensive. And again, it's a way for you to engage directly with reporters. So I think that we have another poll, and why don't we
I could go ahead and launch that poll.
Before we launch that poll, why don't we end with that poll? But let me just share a couple more things, and then we'll end with the poll. Okay, so the biggest part of getting media attention during election year is you have to pick the right hook, and you have to have the right angle. And what I mean by that is you have to have something that is timely, that's of interest. And then once you get reporters on the hook and they're interested, then you have to be able to provide. And so if you send a press release, before you send that press release, you have to have your spokespeople lined up and your spokespeople available. Final point that I'll say is sometimes, we tell stories, or we tell about people's experiences. If you're going to do that, as a strategy to get media coverage, you want to use a story as an entry point for engagement. And the good thing about that is it provides a way for people to grasp the concept and to connect with an issue quickly. But when you use a story, you want to use it ethically. You want to be mindful of the emotional aftertaste, and you want to share stories only with consent. So as you say, okay, well, we've got this great campaign that we're working on, and we really should have people covered. We really should have people covering it. And here's a story about the impact that we're having. You want to make sure that you have the person's full consent, and that you're sharing only the information that is necessary to get reporters interested. So let me stop there. And if we could go to this last poll, and then I'll be happy to answer any questions that, that you all have.
All right. So I've launched the. Go ahead, Mona.
Good. No, I was just saying, Jennifer's launching, JMO's launching the poll. And again, if you have questions, please put them in the chat. And then JMO, I saw that we had one.
Yeah, we have two questions from Melinda. I don't know if you want to look at them now, Jennifer, or wait after this poll. So we're almost done with the poll. We're waiting on a couple of folks. All right, it looks like we're almost. All right, closing the polls now. You're on mute, Jennifer. Yeah. You're still on mute. That's weird. Oh, there you go.
So most of you said that the way that you receive your information is via text message. And I wanted to ask you this because as you think about the people who you're communicating with, you need to find out how they prefer to receive information. And when I say the people that you're communicating with, I'm talking about journalists as well as the people who your organization serves. And so with journalists, there are some people who only want you to email them. There are some people who never want to receive a phone call ever. Even if they give you their number, they do not want you to call them. And so as you think about, how to figure out how you want to receive information and how the people who you serve want to receive information, or the people who you're organizing with. You also want to be clear about what reporters want. And if you are sharing confidential information with journalists, you want to make sure that you're doing so on an encrypted platform such as Signal. A lot of journalists have Signal. So I'll stop there, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you all have.
So there's two questions. I'll read them out. And this is from Melinda. In looking for influencers around climate change / justice, I see a lot of organizations and then some celebrities that are active with great followings. Would you treat organizations the same as an individual influencer for media purposes?
Will I treat organizations the same?
As individual influencers for media purposes, yeah.
I think organizations are a little bit different, because with organizations, there's typically various layers that you have to go through in order to get someone to speak on behalf of an issue. And so I think in terms of your outreach strategy, you should be cultivating relationships with organizations, but I think it's probably quicker to get to individual influencers. So yes, I would treat them slightly different.
And then their second question, when you're sending an audio press release, do you need to send it to someone that you know? So in terms of is already working on a piece related to your topic, or do you need to send it to get them to work on the piece related to your topic?
Okay, so when I was talking about audio releases, I was envisioning that you may not know if people are interested in the topic. And so I was envisioning you doing it for people who you don't know what they're covering. And there are various media search databases. And in those databases, you can pull a list of reporters who are producers or radio hosts. And I think audio for press releases is really good for people on radio or people with podcasts. And so you can build a customized list, and then I would send it to them. And you could if you have Vimeo, you could upload your, actually Vimeo is not audio. Vimeo is just videos, but you could upload it to, like, you could put it on Dropbox. You can put it on, I don't want to put it on your website because that'll slow it down. But the long story is I envision that going to people who you don't know. If you know someone, sometimes on Twitter, journalists will say, I'm working on a story about X, and I would love to hear from people on this issue. If you see that, by all means, send it to them. But even if you don't know who's working on it, but you feel like it's important, then you send it to everybody.
Great. Do folks have any other questions? Feel free to chat. Any questions in the chat box? We have about another 7 minutes with Jennifer this evening, so.
And this is being recorded. We'll definitely upload it to FCYO's YouTube channel and send it out to folks, and then folks who weren't able to make it. So you'll still have these resources at your hand.
Well, I'll just share as folks maybe think about some of their questions, back to Jennifer's point around using particular moments to connect your issue. During the State of the Union address, we worked with Jennifer and some organizing groups that were working in relationship to our Youth Power Lab to pull a piece together that was essentially a State of the Union address from youth organizing, and Jennifer helped us get it placed in color lines. And so we were able to get some traction from that. And it was nothing that I would have ever thought to do. I was like, the State of the Union address, I don't want to do anything around the State of the Union address. I was won over with the strategy, and then we got a placement in color lines, which we felt really happy about.
And the thing about the State of the Union is, you know, for every State of the Union address, you can almost guess who the media is going to talk to and who they're going to hear from. They're going to hear from elected officials, and they're going to hear from adults. But you know, youth have a perspective on the State of the Union, at least the state of youth as well. And so that's kind of where we got that from, is thinking about, okay, well, who are the likely messengers? Who are the unlikely messengers? And then can we tie, is there a way to tie it in?
Anybody else? Any last questions, comments? See, can we?
Thank you for your notes. Thank you for your note, Marcia.
Can speak briefly about reaching out to reporters and influencers on social media. Do you have any recommendations?
Sure. So for reporters on social media and influencers, it's very important to read their bio. And the reason that you should read their bio is, one, sometimes that's where their contact information is listed. And then two, sometimes they will tell you whether or not they want to be pitched on social media. And there are some people who are on social media just to listen to conversations, just to observe. And there are other people who are on for personal reasons, and they do not want to be pitched at all. And they will tell you that. And so I think if you look at their bios, you can find out if they want to be contacted in that way. And if they don't mention it in their bio, then it's possible that you can contact them. Next to their name, there's a little envelope for some journalists who have their direct messages open, meaning you don't have to follow them and they don't have to follow you in order for you to communicate with them. If you see an envelope next to their name, then you can inbox them and you can message them. And if you message them, I would be very, very brief. Hi, my name is Jennifer. We're doing this State of the Union response. And, there are no young people who are prepared, or let me give you a better one. So the State of the Union is going to be on Monday. The Democrats have already lined up the person who's going to give their response. The person who's going to give their response does not represent young people, but we're going to have our own response. Are you interested in talking to us? Something that's very, very short and something that seeks to move the conversation off of social media where you can have a longer engagement. So I've done that. I've also done it with radio hosts and podcast hosts to say, you know what, I have a great idea for your story. Who's your producer? Or who should I be talking to about this angle? So another question is, what are some creative ways that you or someone in the past have done to generate media coverage? I just want some past ideas to come up with. So one thing that I've done is I created something called, I think it was a pitchathon. And the pitchathon, I was working with young people with Tenants and Workers United here in Virginia, in Alexandria, Virginia. And I did a training with the young people and these were high school students, on how to pitch the media. And then once we did the training, they all had scripts and the young people pitched the media directly. So it wasn't Jennifer, it was the high school students. And it is very, very difficult for reporters to hang up on a high school student. So that was really creative. I also remember years ago, a Bush administration official was coming to the city that I lived in. His name was Andrew Card, like C-A-R-D. And we created a 6-foot neon pink greeting card for him. And we stood on a busy intersection in downtown Columbus and held the card. And we told the media, hey, we have this enlarged 6-foot neon pink card. We're going to be out here and we want to send a message. And we got coverage, we got coverage from that. I have also done, I'm a big proponent of media conference calls because it's easier to get a reporter to dial into a conversation versus physically coming to a location. I'm experimenting with an event, and it's for a new restaurant, and we're going to do a food tasting just for journalists. So we're going to bring them in and we're going to feed them, and then we're going to get some coverage that way. So those are some of the things that I've done. I've also invited, I think that when journalists can experience what you're doing very directly, it's powerful, and it's a way to get coverage. And so I try to create situations where the journalists can experience it. It's a lot better if they see it and experience it than for me to tell them. So I've created experiences where journalists could be in the room with high school students, and then, you know, have people prearranged to speak with them. And I think, you know, a big thing for me is if I have an event and I don't get good coverage, I always try to ask myself why. And I try to ask the people who I'm working with, okay, well, why do you think that is? And I try to learn something from every experience. And if you're always thinking, okay, well, how could this have gone better? Or what did I do wrong? Or where did I push too hard? Where didn't I push too hard? You will naturally improve over time.
Thank you, Jennifer. And with that, we're at time. Jennifer, will you chat your contact information again in the chat box? So again, Jennifer has a consulting firm, and if anybody has follow-up conversations, can outreach to Jennifer. And we will be, as JMO said, using this recording and sending it out to you all as participants, and then it'll be posted on our YouTube channel. So we thank you all so much for spending part of your day with us. We know media is both fun, challenging, and important to our work. And so we're always looking for opportunities to help folks build those skills and use Jennifer as a resource. So thank you so much, Jennifer, for also using part of your evening to be with us. JMO, do you have anything to close out with?
No, just thank you, everyone. And we hope you have a really great long weekend.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.